I am a tribal Aboriginal and I hate the welcome to country. As a tribal person, why? Welcome every other bastard on country when I, as an Aboriginal person, have never felt welcomed on my own ground. On my own dirt, never been felt welcome. Welcome everyone in to continue to take. What do you reckon?
Well,
Ben, what do you reckon?
well, the unwelcome, or you're not welcome, I think it poses some really hard truths. And we see, blackfellas and the generosity and the spirit of care that is innate to who we are as a peoples, despite the enduring mess that continues to get imposed on us, still turning up to provide safe passage and welcoming to people who are often doing the oppressing. So I think it's, it's interesting, right? We see welcome to Canberra's at welcome to countries in Canberra for policymakers then to go and institute rations cards or to finance fossil fuel companies against the wishes of Indigenous peoples like Middle Arm. I've seen Uncle Richard Fijo here, and knowing that the government is pursuing gas expansion against the wishes of the Larrakia. They're passing deep sea dumping bills, which enables gas expansion against the wishes of the Tiwi traditional owners, fracking in the Beetaloo Basin. I mean, the list goes on. So, I think to Arnie's question, it's I love the way that she's reframed it, and I think it causes paucity in the thinking, and maybe it's time that we stop being so welcoming.
Marcia, what do you think?
We were welcomed here by Jawa Yunupingu this morning in his language. The Gumatj own their land here. It was granted under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act in the Northern Territory many years ago, and the land is owned in trust for the traditional owners by a traditional owner trust. So this land rights arrangement here is the best in the country, and was, developed at a time when such rights were conceivable. The opposition to our rights since has been rather ferocious, and we're seeing that in this debate. I think many Aboriginal people around the country who do not have their land rights and face the kind of racism that our interlocutor would face in North Queensland would feel quite differently. She would, I imagine, and I'd like to hear more, feel that she can't welcome people to her country unless she has formal rights in her own country. And I've seen the racism in North Queensland. I worked there for many years. It would be a terrible burden on a traditional owner to welcome people who hate Aboriginal people. That's the truth of it. In some parts of Australia, it's like that. And we see the surge in racism in the referendum debate. And going back to the question of treaties, the reason why we're discussing this is because it's been raised by the opposition leader as a scare tactic, saying that, the voice is a Trojan horse and the government's being secretive about the real intentions of negotiating a treaty. So as I indicated before, all of this is in the public domain. It's legislated in at least 2 states. There are the Indigenous land use agreements, and furthermore, the opposition spokesman has been speaking personally to corporate leaders and telling them that they're wrong to support the voice. And I know some of them have explained to him that they have formal Indigenous land use agreements, registered contractual arrangements. They're registered in the federal court, and that, you know, these are not only reflect the values of the company, but the compliance of companies with Australian laws and with international standards set by their shareholders. So the opposition spokesman thinks nothing of that and continues to hoodwink the public into believing that the corporations that are parties to Indigenous land use agreements under the Native Title Act have been hoodwinked into a woke position. So this is all, you know, language from the United States. It's a particular kind of campaign tactic. It should have no part in Australian politics, and the Australian people are entitled to know the truth about Indigenous policy. It's much more complicated and complex than the opposition spokesman would have you believe. And I've been really disturbed by the debates of the last while, especially during the last week. Nobody's being deceptive about treaties. They're well underway in Victoria and in Queensland.
In WA?
And yes, and in WA, where 4 Indigenous land use agreements have been legislated as the Noongar settlement by the Western Australian government, and therefore the Crown in Western Australia is a party to that settlement. It's a comprehensive settlement, and on those grounds, according to Professor George Williams, it could be described as a modern treaty, because that's what modern treaties in Canada look like. So in some parts of Queensland, it's entirely possible to whip up hysteria about, you know, Aboriginal people getting rights that white people don't have. It all sounds rather like, you know, 92, 93 in the Queensland election when Pauline Hanson was elected. The debate has shifted to, you know, a kind of Pauline Hanson One Nation platform, and Australians who don't keep up with all the complexities of policy and legislation don't understand that despite that vast administrative regime sitting over the top of us and the legislative regime, people still don't have houses, children still don't have schools, that teachers, the young lady just told us that their schools are empty because the teachers are not turning up because there are no teachers. This is a desperate situation. Education is a very high priority for us, and yet we don't have the teaching force in our communities. And yes, it's the responsibility of the states. So this is another function of the voice that's tremendously important. So we imagined when we were designing the regional voices that they would have direct relationships with state and territory governments and therefore start to sort out these education problems. But the national voice would have the convening power of a national advisory body to bring the Commonwealth, the states together to resolve matters of national priority like education. There are hardly any secondary schools in remote Australia. There are so few, and this is why private schools are stepping in and providing scholarships to children in remote areas, because there are hardly any secondary schools. They're not getting a secondary education.
Malarndirri, I want to bring you in. How do you feel when you hear Narelle saying that she doesn't feel welcomed on her own dirt? And we might need to just keep it a little brief for her.
Sure.
Hurtling towards the end of the show.
Okay. Well, firstly, thanks, Aunty Narelle. I think that's important to hear your views. And it is good to hear it from the perspective that you don't feel welcome yourself. But can I just say to the audience here, Dan, and to those watching, that one of the things I get when I travel across the country is a lot of people say to me, we didn't know this. We didn't know this about First Nations people when I was at school. You know, we didn't know about these issues. We weren't taught about the history of First Nations people. We didn't even know anything about the land that I grew up on, that it was Wiradjuri, or that it was the Yolŋu, or that it was the Larrakia. So I hear a lot of that. And what I see from our younger generation now, I mean, even my own girls, they know which country we're walking on and whose land. And these kids, these next generation of Australians, know about First Nations people in this country, and they know that there were people here well before 1788. And I think there is a much bigger message here. Yes, I hear the individual hurt, but I would say to those out there and to Aunty Narelle, I hear you. But I think collectively for our country, it is a good thing. And if First Nations people do not wish to welcome, they have a choice to say no when invited or asked to do so.
I just think it's a poignant question and, riddled with possibility, because how undignifying is that, to think that you are obliged to provide safe passage to welcome people when you don't even feel safe or sound on your own soils, when you are trampled on. And I think within that question that calls for paucity, and within that paucity there's possibility.
Taylah.
I think it's a valid question. And for what it's worth from my perspective, if you want to say no to welcoming people on your land, say no. But I will leave you with this. Yet another quote, Dan.
You've got some great quotes.
And it's an Indigenous man who was a professor in political science, and he said this: "We will never have a powerful lobby or be a smashing political force, but we will have intangible unity, which has carried us through centuries of persecution, and we will survive. We will survive because we are a people unified by our humanity, not a pressure group unified for conquest. That is the legacy that our mob come from."
Merrki, I want to come to you to round out this conversation about, perhaps start with your response to what you heard from Narelle about the pain that she's feeling.
Narelle, I'm not sure what welcome you are talking about, whether it's welcome to country, your country, or whether it is visitors coming into your country. But I will tell you a story, Narelle. There was a time when even I don't remember people in Western Australia or people in Sydney welcoming non-Indigenous people or other peoples. I know because I remember, I'm going to say your name, Merrki, Jamboa, Marawili, and his clan went to Sydney. And this was quite a few years ago. And they went there to open an exhibition. And I remember, I didn't go at that time, which I usually do. Whole lot of us, families go there. But this time I didn't. And I remember that there was a smoking ceremony on the top of a building. And you had a big tin with leaves in it. And they smoked it because there were so many people that you smoked that day. So this smoke was coming out from the tin, right? And then the people started coming around the tin so that they could be touched by the smoke, means welcome to our exhibition. And from then on, that smoking ceremony started happening everywhere. In the Yolŋu law, smoking is only done after death has been finished, after initiation of young boys, and of course the birth of a child. That's when the smoking only is done, and only by leaves and fire. Nothing to do with big bins or anything like that.
Thank you.